Spiders have always provoked an uncontrollable fear in many people. Even small house spiders are too much for most, so imagine how frightening a giant spider can be. Much maligned, the subject of countless horror stories, spiders have always been used to great effect by movie makers, portraying heroes bravely dealing with threatening spiders and villains yielding when faced with such a monster. Tragically, this portrayal of tarantulas only serves to confirm and enhance people's fears, much to the detriment of the animals themselves. As a group of organisms, spiders are without doubt one of the most successful. They are found in all regions of the world, from the hot lowland deserts and rainforests of the tropics to the subarctic snowfields, and wherever they occur, they are usually found in vast numbers. They are without exception predators. Their prey is mainly insects, but they will eat anything they can overpower, including members of their own kind or even of their own species. Spiders are part of a major group of organisms known as arthropods. This group also includes millipedes, centipedes, crustaceans, and insects, and comparing individuals from each of these groups shows many similarities. Spiders themselves come in a whole range of sizes, from just 0.5 millimetre in length to veritable monsters with a leg span in excess of 25 centimetres, literally the size of a dinner plate. These giants are the so-called bird-eating spiders of South America. Bird-eating spiders are often referred to as tarantulas, but they bear very little resemblance to the true tarantula spiders found in southern Europe. Nevertheless, these days, the name tarantula conjures up in one's mind the huge hairy monsters of the tropics. The bird-eater title for these spiders is also misleading. All of these large creatures capture their prey by pouncing on it and immobilizing it with a paralyzing bite. The majority of these species are terrestrial and have very little chance of ever catching a bird. Even the arboreal tree-dwelling species would find most birds a bit too active to make them easy prey. It is true that there are some species of spider that are highly poisonous and capable of inflicting a highly painful and often deadly bite. The Sydney funnel-web spider of Australia and the South American wandering spiders being perhaps the most relevant examples. In many countries of the world, black widow spiders, of which there are numerous species, have a largely undeserved reputation for being deadly. And whilst deaths have occurred as a result of a bite, most people would normally survive the experience. Wandering spiders and widows are not tarantulas though, nor is the Sydney funnel-web, although it is a closer relative. To date, no deadly species of tarantula has been discovered, and their reputation as being a truly dangerous animal is largely unfounded. Tarantulas are found throughout the tropical and subtropical regions of the world. Those of the New World, i.e. North and South America, have their abdomens covered in dense, short, extremely fine hairs known as setae. These hairs readily detach themselves from the animal's body if it is handled, and some tarantulas can also detach them intentionally using their back legs, a process known as scuffing. The hairs are urticating. In other words, they cause irritation, and the tarantula's intention is to cause extreme discomfort to a potential predator. These hairs are particularly irritating if they come into contact with sensitive areas of the body, such as the eyes or nostrils. A would-be predator usually learns very quickly that a tarantula is not such a tasty meal after all. The old world tarantulas of Africa and Asia do not have these urticating hairs, and consequently another method of defence is necessary. Many of these species are exceptionally aggressive, and a typical reaction to provocation is for them to rear up on their hind legs, bare their fangs, and strike out at a would-be predator. In such a species, the display is not all pretense, and they are capable of inflicting a severe and often very painful bite. Now in the studio tonight we have a few people who are thinking about buying a spider. We've got Adam, Ryan, Andrew, Simon and Jackie. Now Adam, I think you've got the first question.
How long do they live?
Very long-lived animals, tarantulas. Some can live 7, 8 years. Others have been known to live even longer. 15 years is not unknown, and one apparently lived for 23 years. That was a red-kneed tarantula that was, I think, in London Zoo.
Can you keep them together?
It's not a good idea. Tarantulas are predators. That means they eat other living animals. So if you put two tarantulas together, the biggest one will normally eat the smallest one. So not a good idea at all.
Are they dangerous and can they kill you?
To date, nobody has ever found a deadly tarantula. They'll bite you, they are poisonous, but the poison's quite mild, a bit like a bee sting. So as far as we know, nobody has yet been killed by a tarantula, and they're not considered a deadly animal.
Can you pick them up?
Some species you can. Some species are quite handleable. The Mexican redknee is reputed to be a very inoffensive animal. But if you try to pick up something like a baboon spider from Africa, then you're very likely to get bitten, and the bite could be quite severe. So I always recommend it's not a good idea to pick them up. They don't like being picked up. They'll put up with it, some species, but others certainly won't. So, not a recommended thing to do.
Are they expensive to keep?
Very cheap to keep. Usually they'll eat 2 or 3 locusts or something similar each week. Locusts are quite easy to get from pet shops and quite cheap. As long as you give them a drink of water, usually on some cotton wool, then that's it. That's all they need.
So if you wanted to buy a tarantula, where would you get one from?
That's a very good question, and I think it's something we need to deal with in a bit more detail. When buying your first tarantula, a problem you may encounter is exactly what to ask for. Many species have more than one common name, and some suppliers only know them by their scientific names. It is best to go armed with as much information as you can. Until fairly recently, the range of tarantula spiders available in this country was very small. The most familiar was probably the beautifully marked redknee. Others included the chili rose, zebra, curly hair, Trinidad chevron, and pink toe. These days, however, tarantulas have become more popular as pets, and consequently the numbers and range of species available have increased accordingly. It is very pleasing to know that many of these newcomers come from captive bred stock, which removes some of the pressures placed on these creatures in the wild. And indeed, this is the only way you are likely to come across a redknee. The vast majority of pet shops that sell reptiles will nowadays also sell tarantulas, and you could also visit an entomological fair where specialist dealers often have a wide range of species for sale. Such dealers will also be able to give excellent advice and assistance to a prospective owner. To make sure you have as few problems as possible with your new pet, I would strongly recommend that you start with a species that has a reputation for being inoffensive, such as the chili rose, curly hair, redknee, if you can get one, or pink toe. On a cautionary note though, do bear in mind that even the most placid of creatures can occasionally have a bad day and not behave in a typical manner. As far as the price is concerned, this can vary enormously, depending upon the species you want and also who you are buying it from. It is a good idea to make a few inquiries before you make your final decision. For your first tarantula, you should, where possible, select a female, as this sex has a much greater life expectancy. To be honest though, males are only rarely available, although a spider bought as a sub-adult can occasionally turn out to be a male, as it's extremely difficult for a non-expert to sex a young specimen. The males only become obviously so after their final skin change or molt. Always make sure that the spider you choose has all of its 8 legs intact, as well as its 2 pedipalps. These look very similar to the legs and are situated on either side of the mouth parts. A healthy tarantula should be able to support its weight on its legs and move around quickly and easily when it needs to do so, and it should have a round, firm-looking abdomen. A brightly coloured, hairy specimen has probably just molted, and this is in all probability a very healthy spider. Any specimen that has its legs folded underneath itself should be avoided, as this is undoubtedly an unhealthy individual and is most likely dying. You should also avoid any large, dull-looking specimens, as these may be quite old and not as good a buy as a younger, smaller spider. On a final note, do bear in mind that a tarantula is a long-lived animal, some females having a recorded longevity in excess of 15 years, so you have to be prepared to look after your pet for this length of time. Having bought your tarantula, you should buy some food for it at the same time, and it's probably a good idea to check that it's feeding and drinking properly before you introduce it to its permanent home. So, assuming you still want a tarantula as a pet, the next thing we've got to consider is building a home for it. And with the wide range of tanks and containers available, you're certainly not going to be stuck for choice. As far as I'm concerned, the most important consideration though is the welfare of the spider. And as long as they're well fed, they'll remain content and motionless for hours on end. This is particularly true of the ground-dwelling species. Many enthusiasts actually keep their spider collections in small plastic containers like this one. As you can see, it's just simply a small plastic container with a tight-fitting screw-top lid. The minimum size of the base of your container should be twice the size of the spider, and it should be at least 10 centimetres deep. However, many people want their spider's home to be an attractive feature of the lounge or other room, and it certainly makes an interesting talking point for visitors. For this, a larger container is necessary, but don't make it too large as your tarantula will have difficulty finding its food. As far as you can, plan a home for your tarantula that's as close as possible to its natural habitat. There are basically two types of tarantula. Those that are ground dwellers, such as the Mexican red knee, and those that are tree dwelling or arboreal and live on the trunks and branches of trees, like the Indian ornamentals tarantula. Let's look at the home for a ground dweller first. A tropical fish tank like this one makes an ideal cage. These are readily available from any reputable tropical fish supplier. The cage needs to be escape-proof, but if you're going to use a lightweight hood like this one, do remember that a large tarantula can easily lift it and make a run for freedom. This is no fun at all if you've got an arachnophobe in the family. One possible solution is to use a wire grill like this one, and that can be fitted between the hood and the tank. If it's fairly tight fitting, then so much the better, but if it isn't very tight fitting, then you can always put small velcro pads in the corners and that should hold it in place. It also has the added advantage that it keeps the spider away from the hot light bulb in the hood. So now let's see how we can turn this tank into a home for our tarantula. You're going to need some form of substrate to line the bottom of the tank. You could use vermiculite, or you could use garden peat. Both of these are readily available from most garden centres. Whilst both of them hold moisture well, allowing you to keep the humidity in your tank high, and vermiculite has the advantage of not encouraging the growth of mould or white mites, I personally prefer peat, as it has a more natural appearance. The depth of substrate you place in the tank is a matter of personal taste, but it needs to be at least 2.5 centimetres deep. Most ground-dwelling tarantulas live in underground burrows, and if you intend to allow your pet to do this, then the substrate will need to be at least 10 centimetres deep. Do bear in mind though that having made its burrow, it will spend most of its life in it. Being nocturnal creatures, they normally only come out at night, and even then they will only do so if they're hungry. Consequently, you wouldn't see much of your pet. If you want your spider to be on permanent display, then you need to provide it with some form of shelter which you can see into. And the depth of the substrate should be kept to a minimum. Tunnel-shaped pieces of bark like this make ideal hideaways. And of course there are many other alternatives that you can use, even though they perhaps don't look quite so good. Bits of plastic pipe, even a cutaway, well, an empty plant pot like this one, or even one that's been cut away to to make it a bit flatter at the bottom. To keep with this fairly natural theme that I'm trying to achieve in this tank, I'm going to use the small piece like this. From the spider's point of view, the tank's probably as decorated as it needs to be, but it's not really going to enhance the appearance of your lounge. For that, we need to add a few more bits and pieces. And to start with, we can actually start adding some pieces of bark. If you get gaps behind it, be careful though, because the spider will sometimes wander down there, so the closer you can get it to the tank, the better. Then we can add a few pieces of rock, just again to make it look a bit more natural. Rocks and bark is one thing. If you're going to make it really look effective, then we need to put some plants in. These particular ones are designed for bottle gardens. They come in a very tiny pot. That tiny pot can literally be sunk into your peat. As you're going to be keeping the humidity in the tank fairly high, you may feel it's not necessary to provide another source of water. This is not true. You need to provide your tarantula with some form of small dish for drinking water. For example, we could use a plastic plant pot holder, a small pot dish, or a coffee filter lid. Because the substrate in this tank is fairly shallow, I'm going to use the coffee filter lid as a water dish. What you do is simply push it into the substrate so that the rim of the edge of the dish is level with the top of the substrate. You could quite simply just fill the dish with water, like this. And you may think that would be okay, but in all fairness, most tarantulas find it very difficult to drink water directly. So what I think is a good idea is to actually take a piece of cotton wool and just place it in there. You could use sponge as well, so that it soaks up the water. You'll find you probably can add some more water to it. And then the tarantula can quite literally come in, get hold of the cotton wool and squeeze it between its mouth parts to get itself some water to drink. As well as having drinking water, your spider needs to be kept warm. And cage temperature should be maintained at between 21 and 27 degrees Celsius. The best way of providing heat for a tank of this type is to use an ordinary light bulb. In the hood I'm using, I've got a strip light. Of equal importance to maintaining the correct temperature in your tank is maintaining the correct humidity. Even desert-dwelling tarantulas spend the hottest part of the day in their burrows. Here the relative humidity is quite high. They only come out at night so they can avoid being dehydrated. In this country, most tarantulas that you can buy probably require a humidity of about 70%. Obviously a humidity gauge attached to the inside of your tank, along with a thermometer, will allow you to maintain the correct levels. Now would be a good time to sight your tank before we add some water, which would make it very heavy. And what you'll find is that occasionally the tops of some of these tanks are quite sharp, so it's perhaps a good idea to wear a pair of protective gloves. And just whilst I'm over here, it's perhaps worth pointing out that on the surface that we're going to move the tank to, I've placed some cork tiles. These will protect the surface of your furniture from the tank. Watering helps maintain the correct conditions for your spider, as well as making sure that the plants are watered. Once you've got the conditions more or less right, you can just maintain the humidity using a plant mist spray, probably once a day. Your tank's now ready to receive your spider. Right, all that now remains then is to put the trap in so that the spider can't escape, and put the hood on to provide your spider with its heat. The only real disadvantage of this type of light is that it will tend to dry the cage out a bit, so it's probably a good idea to make sure you spray it at least once a day. If you are getting an arboreal spider like a pink-toed tarantula, there are a few basic changes that need to be incorporated into the design of its cage. In their natural habitat, such species live their entire lives up in the branches of rainforest trees. They will therefore spend the majority of their time up in the top of their artificial home. Many species in this group are very agile creatures with the ability to jump considerable distances. You have been warned. The main difference between the tank for this type of tarantula and that we saw for the ground dweller is that in this tank the largest dimension is the height. Because spiders of this type come from tropical rainforest regions, they need a higher humidity than those we saw for the ground dweller. And basically what I'm going to use here is vermiculite as the substrate. The reason I'm doing that is that this has a much better water holding capacity than peat, so it means you can maintain your humidity in the tank at a fairly high level all the time. In order to make it look like a rainforest tank, a very good way of doing that is to use, like we did before, pieces of bark. Now this one's quite a lot longer than the one we saw before because obviously the tank's much taller, so we perhaps have a bit of difficulty getting it to stand in the right place. So what I suggest you might do is to use a piece of blue tack. Just stick it to the top of the piece of wood and hopefully it'll just hold it in place whilst you get this tank settled down. Not too bad at all. Okay, now the other thing we need to give our spider again, of course, is a shelter. And what I've got here is a very nice rolled piece of bark that can just literally stand in the corner. And all we've got to do really now is start to decorate the tank. Again, at this stage the tank's probably ready for the spider to live in, but we need to make it look a little bit more like a rainforest home, and in order to do that we need yet again plants. Now in this tank we can certainly use the normal plants that we used last time in their small pots, again the bottle garden types. Because it's a tree dweller, then perhaps we ought to add a little tree. I've got a branch here which hopefully we can get in, and that can just prop across the front. It certainly makes it look a little bit more like a natural environment. A few rocks at the bottom. Now obviously if we want to make this look like a proper rainforest, you'd expect plants to be growing around the tops of the trees as well. And that's quite a difficult thing to achieve with actual real plants because they've got to have somewhere to put their roots. So what I suggest for this effect is to use some artificial plants. And certainly I've got a few here just to dangle over the sides, which hopefully enhance the appearance of the tank. There are now really two things you need to consider with regard to the welfare of your spider. Being a rainforest species, spiders of this type need a fairly high humidity, and it's probably a good idea to use a condensation trap like this one just to put into the top of the tank, and it'll obviously maintain the wetness that you've created when you've added the water. That fits quite nicely. Because the spider's going to live at the top of the tank, then heating is going to be a problem. In this situation you can't use an ordinary light bulb. There's too much heat. So what I suggest you use is probably a bulb like this one. This is a fluorescent, one of these energy saving bulbs. Gives off a little bit of heat but not a lot. So when that goes on the top of the tank, you're not creating a hot environment at the top of the tank. Because we've not got heat with the bulb, we therefore have to look at an alternative. And the alternative I would suggest is one of these heat pads. That will provide heat at the bottom of the tank. It'll also help you maintain the humidity in the tank because the drying effect isn't there. This is actually sited underneath the tank. It's under the tank, it lays on a cork tile. This will protect your furniture, and it should provide the tarantula with the environment that it needs. Right, I'm going to site the tank obviously before I put water in. This being such a big tank, certainly needs to be put in place before we put any water in. Of course we now need to actually put a couple of gauges in to make sure we can maintain the correct temperature and humidity in our tarantula's tank, just as we did in the last tank. And then we can add the water. You may be thinking at this point that we haven't yet put in a drinking dish, but with a spider like this you're not actually going to need one. It's highly unlikely that an arboreal spider will actually visit the ground anyway. Obviously, once you've got the water in, then a good spray on a regular basis will make sure you keep the tank nice and humid. Your spider will probably get all the water it needs, in fact, from the plants and bark that make up the sides of its tank. And all that remains now then is to actually put the spider in. Tarantulas eat large soft-bodied invertebrates like locusts, crickets or mealworms. If you intend to have one or even 2 or 3 tarantulas, then feeding is going to present very few problems. Most pet shops that deal in reptiles will also sell suitable food for your spider at a fairly reasonable price. You have a choice here because you can purchase a few crickets or locusts on a weekly basis, or you can choose to maintain a colony of one of these species, such as this one. However, if you intend to keep such a colony, then you should ask your supplier for the best way of going about it. Having introduced your spider to its tank, you should allow it a few days to settle down. Only after this initial settling down period should any food be introduced to the tank, and at first the type offered should be such that the spider has very little difficulty in overpowering it. Unless your spider shows obvious signs of hunger, don't give it large amounts of food at one go. Little and often is a good rule of thumb. You can usually gauge how hungry your spider is by observing how readily it pursues and catches its prey. There are no rules governing how much food you should provide. 3 locusts a week is often advised for a large tarantula. They may follow this pattern, they may eat 3 in one day, or they may stop eating for months. The tarantula decides what's best for itself. The important thing is not to be too concerned if your spider stops feeding for a period of time. It may be that it is ill, but it is far more likely to be for some other reason, and I will deal with these possibilities later on. As for cleaning, tarantulas are very clean animals. Any remnants of food are usually packaged up with silk, while excrement is simply a whitish fluid which dries to a chalky substance. Food debris can simply be removed. The water dish should be kept clean, being washed and refilled every 2 or 3 days. Thorough cleaning of the tank need only be carried out once or twice a year, and you can guarantee that your pet won't even like it this often. As we saw earlier in this video, tarantulas are organisms that belong to that enormous group of animals known as arthropods. All of the creatures that are classified in this group have many features in common, most importantly the possession of a rigid exoskeleton and numerous pairs of jointed legs. However, it is at this point that the similarities end, and we need to look at the sort of differences that enable us to say that this specimen is a spider, whereas that one is an insect, and so on. The main ways in which the arthropods are separated into different groups is achieved by using just 2 major characteristics: how many pairs of legs they have, and how many sections the body is divided into. Insects, for example, have 3 body sections: head, thorax, and abdomen, and 3 pairs of legs. Spiders, on the other hand, have only 2 body sections, the head and thorax being combined to form the cephalothorax, an abdomen, and 4 pairs of legs. We can use these deceased specimens of a South American bird-eating spider to look at tarantula anatomy in more detail. The cephalothorax is the attachment point for the legs, pedipalps, mouth parts, and the abdomen, and it contains all the muscles that enable the spider to move around and feed, as well as parts of the nervous system. The carapace is a tough shield of chitin that forms the upper part of the cephalothorax. In the front section of this is a raised section known as the ocular tubercle, which bears the spider's eyes. There are 8 of these, and their arrangement varies with different species. This fact is often used as an aid to identification. 4 pairs of legs radiate from the cephalothorax, and each leg is made up of 7 segments, and these are named as follows, starting at the base: coxa, trochanter, femur, patella, tibia, metatarsus and tarsus, and at the end of the tarsus are two small claws. The lower part of the cephalothorax is known as the sternum. The foremost appendages found on the cephalothorax are the chelicerae, and these consist of two sections: a tough conical base and a curved fang made of very hard chitin. The way in which the chelicerae operate varies in different groups of arachnids, and it is one of the main distinguishing features between tarantulas and the majority of other spiders. The tarantula's fangs are designed to allow it to bite with a downward stabbing motion, whereas those of most other spiders, particularly the web-spinning species, have fangs that meet because they bite towards each other. The second pair of appendages on the head are known as the pedipalps. They look like small legs in an adult female and all juvenile tarantulas, but differ in having one segment, the metatarsus, missing. In adult male tarantulas, however, the structure is somewhat modified, so that they can be used to transfer sperm to a female spider during mating. The abdomen contains all of the organs that make up the tarantula's digestive, reproductive and respiratory systems. The spinnerets, seen here in use by a live tarantula, are the organs that produce the very familiar silk that is used by all spiders and many other arthropods. In tarantulas, they are relatively large organs and, as can be seen here, also very flexible. The anatomy of an adult male differs in the following ways. The tarsus of the pedipalp has two parts: the basal section, which is hollow for the storage of sperm, and a modified tip or embolus, which is used for inserting sperm into a female during mating. The tibia of both front legs have tibial hooks, which are used to hold the female's fangs out of harm's way during mating. In many species, an adult male will also differ in colour from the female, as can be seen in this pair of bird-eaters from South America. Apart from growing old, tarantulas suffer from very few ailments, and only occasionally give any real reason for concern. Although appearing large and relatively robust creatures, they are in fact very vulnerable to injury, particularly to their abdomens, where the skin is quite thin and easily split. You should therefore make sure that pieces of bark or rock that are used in the decor of your tank are devoid of sharp edges, and any large pieces of rock are placed on the bottom of the tank and not on the surface of the substrate, as your spider may burrow under these and risk being crushed in the process. You should also be very careful when moving your pet from one place to another. Try to make sure that there is no risk of your spider falling. Even a fall of 30 centimeters can be fatal if it causes the tarantula's abdomen to split open. As I mentioned earlier, the best way of dealing with your pet is not to handle it at all, but if it escapes, or if you need to move it, then persuade it to walk into a container so that you can transport it to where you want it to be. This way, the chance of a fall is completely avoided. If this is not possible, and you are forced to handle it, then you must wash your hands thoroughly afterwards, and certainly avoid all contact with your eyes, nose or mouth until you have done so. This should ensure that any irritating hairs from the spider are removed from your hands. Large insects introduced as food can also pose a threat to your spider, particularly if they are armed with sharp spines. Adult locusts have such armament on their hind legs, and an untimely kick can easily rupture your tarantula's abdomen. If your tarantula does suffer a tear to the skin of his abdomen, a more experienced keeper might be able to help, but such an injury usually means the end of your pet. If your spider inadvertently damages a leg or pedipalp, as can be seen on this chilly rose, a seal forms automatically to prevent loss of body fluids. Except for adult male tarantulas, a new limb or section of limb will be produced at the next molt, and you will see this later in the video. In the wild, many species of arthropod are preyed upon by parasitic insects, notably parasitic wasps and flies, but the chances of you obtaining a spider affected in this way is very remote indeed. There is, however, one small parasite that does pose a very real threat to the health of any tarantula, and that is the white mite. By sucking its blood, they will bring about the death of any spider. Mites feed on both dead and living matter. They are minute, colourless creatures that thrive in warm, humid conditions. They thrive on neglect, and it is relatively simple to avoid the dangers posed by them. All remains of food should be removed. If you find that there are mites present, then you must move your tarantula to a clean cage, whilst you thoroughly cleanse the contaminated one. Destroy the infected substrate and thoroughly sterilise the cage using hot water. Inspect your spider very carefully for mites. Any you find can be removed using a cotton bud with a spot of Vaseline on it. Simply touching the mite with the bud will make it stick to the Vaseline. It makes a lot of sense to check for mites every time you feed your spider, thus avoiding them becoming a serious problem. Prevention is much better than cure. One thing you must ensure is that you don't inadvertently make your spider ill. Even the mildest household insecticide or deodorant can spell death for your spider. The only other serious problem you may encounter is a spider that stops feeding and is visibly getting thinner. Such a spider is certainly ill and should not be confused with one that is about to molt. It is possible that the temperature you are providing is too low, and consequently your spider is too sluggish to catch its food. Or it could be even that vibrations from nearby hi-fi speakers are causing the apparent loss of appetite. It could be quite simply that it's getting too old. If this is the case, then there is nothing you can do for it. It may live for several more weeks, slowly getting weaker until its legs fold up underneath it and it dies. Molting is an activity that is carried out by all arthropods, being necessary because all species have a tough outer skin, which is in fact an external or exoskeleton, to which all of the muscles and many of the internal body organs are attached. Whilst this admittedly provides excellent protection from predators and the external environment, it does make it difficult for the animal to increase in size. The molting process is a gradual one, and the first sign that it is about to happen is that your spider will stop feeding. If it has a bald patch on its abdomen, then this will gradually darken and turn black. As the actual time of the molt approaches, the spider uses its spinnerets to spin a flat pad of silk, its molting bed. In the wild, this would normally be in the spider's retreat, but as you can see with this flame-kneed tarantula, it's simply placed on the surface of the substrate. Here it sits motionless for several hours until the skin change is imminent, before flipping itself over onto its back, lying on the molting bed. It is the sight of their precious spider in this uncharacteristic position that causes great concern to most novice tarantula keepers, but be assured it is perfectly natural. Again it lies fairly motionless for a considerable period of time, with just the occasional leg movement or general overall wiggle. The movements start to become more rhythmical, however, as the spider progresses into its actual skin change. The first major sign that the old skeleton is about to be shed is when the skin of the abdomen starts to split, as can be seen here. Here in this speeded up sequence, the spider is seen extracting all of its legs, pedipalps and chelicerae from its whole skeleton, and in real time nearly 3 hours have elapsed since our spider flipped over onto its back. What do show up very clearly in this shot are our tarantula's new fangs. At this time they are white, very soft and flexible, but will gradually darken and harden over the next few hours. The spider is now approaching the end of its skin change and should soon be completely free of its old skeleton. Notice the tarsal claws at the end of the spider's legs. These structures under more normal circumstances are very difficult to observe. Now that it is free of its old exoskeleton, the spider rests for a considerable period of time, occasionally exercising its limbs and mouth parts before finally turning over onto its front again. It is at this time that a tarantula is very vulnerable, being quite literally defenseless, as it is unable to move away from or bite any would-be attacker, and you must not disturb your pet in any way during this very crucial period until its new skin has had time to harden. This usually takes about a day, and your spider will probably spend several more days on the molting bed, occasionally lying with its legs outstretched, or flexing and stretching them individually. You should notice after the molt a considerable change in your spider. A spiderling or juvenile will obviously be much larger with longer legs and pedipalps, and all individuals, including full-grown ones, will appear brighter and much richer in colour. Until we began filming this video, I, like most people interested in spiders, assumed that molting was a process all tarantulas carried out on their backs, or at least lying on their sides. It was quite a surprise, therefore, to see this chilly rose, after several aborted attempts to achieve one of these positions, give up and proceed to molt quite successfully, standing in an upright position. Being in this position, the separation of the old surface of the carapace from the new skin below it is the first real sign that the shedding process has started. And again, the splitting of the skin of the abdomen is clearly visible. By speeding up the process once again, the soft, flexible nature of the new skin is very obvious, as the spider rhythmically extracts itself from its old skeleton. This particular spider is one that you may have noticed earlier with a damaged rear leg. Here is a closer shot of that particular leg, and you can see quite clearly that the tarsus and metatarsus are missing. Earlier in this video I mentioned that tarantulas could regenerate damaged limbs. This subsequent shot of our molting chili rose shows just such a regeneration. The missing leg joints have now been replaced. Admittedly they are undersized and without hair, but at the spider's next molt they should attain full size and development. It is important that you do not offer your tarantula any food for at least a week after its molt, as not only the outer skin is replaced at this time, but also the lining of the digestive tracts and other organs, which means your spider is unable and unwilling to feed for several days. And our chili rose is quite obviously not hungry yet. Throughout this video we've done our best to cover everything you might need to know to successfully care for your tarantula. It is important to point out that this is only the beginning for you and your pet, and you may encounter problems not covered by this video. We therefore strongly advise you become a member of either the British Tarantula Society or the American Tarantula Society, which will give you access to advice and information prepared by experts.